If you pick out your most important number and you think down through the organization of other people's most important numbers, you're going to find things that, other people are doing that may even be counterintuitive, right? Or maybe pushing back against the progress, right? Of everybody else or a number of people, or at least the team that they're on, or maybe the entire team. This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Well, I hope that you listened to yesterday's show. If you didn't, I would encourage you to go back and start there because I'm going to continue a conversation today from that. Really thoughts, from a book that I'm reading that I feel like is so applicable to every business, even nonprofits as well. I mean, I think a lot of this you could even apply to your family, also your life. I mean, it's so applicable in so many ways. But it's a book called Your Most Important Number by Lee Benson. He is somebody that I've just run across recently. I didn't know of him really before this book, but the title of the book caught my attention when I was reading some other things. I thought, hey, that sounds like a book that I need to read, and I'm thankful that I have. I feel like most of the. I mean, there's really I would say there's not like a ton of new things in this book. However, he does break these things down in a different way. And I would say even a little more simplistic than some others. You heard me talk yesterday about how maybe it's a similar operating system that he's created that's similar to say traction, EOS. There's a few different things, but some things that are very similar. They may call them different things, but ultimately I feel like they're very similar, and you could pick one or the other, and as long as you're sticking to one of them, you're going to be so much better as a business and as an organization than you were before, right? This book specifically, right off the bat, right? We talked yesterday talking about winning means keeping score, and I'm not going to go through all that again today because I encourage you to listen to yesterday's show as I went through about the first half of the book, just a number of things that stuck out to me and some specific things about LifeBridge Capital of how we have applied those things. And I want to pick up today where we left off. I may not even get through all of it today because I was reading and reading, and there's just a number of things that were so applicable. There's a few sections that I want to read to you, or just a little pieces, because I want you to hear these things, and I want to support his book as well. So go pick it up, listen to it on Audible. Either way, I don't get anything obviously for saying that. I don't know him personally, not yet anyway, but I wanted to go through a few things that I highlighted that I felt were crucial, really, in any business that are so applicable to LifeBridge Capital and to me personally. And so I knew that these things would be helpful for you as well. So we left off yesterday where we talked about know what is expected 100% of the time, and we talked about that from the top of the organization all the way down to the bottom. Everybody needs to know what's expected 100% of the time, and knowing your what he calls your min or your MIN, your most important number. And really, he goes into what's drivers of that as well. And we won't have time to go into all of that, but then he calls it a mind, right? MIND. So your most important number and the drivers that are behind, right? That number. And so I encourage you to, again, to listen to the book at least or read it. I think you will be better off and your organization will be as well. So let's move forward. So he talks about notice how every department is pointed in the same direction. There's no sideways energy. Progress is palatable, and therefore team engagement is high. We talked about yesterday that the most important number at the top, and underneath that, just think about like an org chart, right? I mean, that's pretty much what you're laying out here in everybody's number, right? The main number that everybody's responsible for that's feeding into the most important number at the very top. And they're all pointed right in the same direction. They're all going in the same direction. And every team should have a most important number. All teams' most important numbers they're by design should support, right? Improving the organization's most important number. And I mean, he elaborates on that, but ensuring every team, right, is pulling in the same direction. And oftentimes we think that they are, we assume that they are. If we really sit back and dive in, I think you'll figure out that oftentimes they're not. And we oh man, I'm so guilty of this as well. I mean, we have dove into more of this recently, even before this book, in helping every team member ensure that they know what they're responsible for. And we've not mastered this. by any means. And it's not an easy process. That's for sure, especially for smaller teams. We talked about that a lot yesterday about how everybody has to be a little bit of a Swiss Army knife and do different things. So it's hard to always put a number, exact number on what they're doing. However, all the tasks that they're doing should be pushing towards one main number. And again, I encourage you to listen to yesterday's show, but you're continually addressing the organizational bottlenecks he talks about. There's always yeah, there's always one function holding the organization back more than the others. And there always is. There's always something that's pushing back against you. And and it's not always easy to figure out what that is. And he goes on, but I just want you to think about that in your organization. What's pushing back the wrong direction? If you pick out your most important number and you think down through the organization of other people's most important numbers, you're going to find things that other people are doing that may even be counterintuitive, right? Or maybe pushing back against the progress, right, of everybody else, or a number of people, or at least the team that they're on, or maybe the entire team could be pushing back against that. So he goes into also which most of us do this in some form or fashion. We have a strategy session, right, or a strategic meeting for the leadership department of an organization. Sam and I do this at least annually. We try, given that we live all the way across the country from each other, I have just learned, and he has as well, that it's so crucial that we dedicate at least a day, probably at least every 6 months, that we are purposefully together to talk about strategy of LifeBridge Capital. And and it's so crucial that we're together when doing that. Like, the conversations are very different when we are together. We know we're focused on this thing versus just over Zoom. It's very different. Okay. And one thing that we found is crucial, again, even before this book, because he's gonna mention this as well. But what we have found to be so helpful to make that strategy session a success, and maybe we'll do a whole show on this in the near future. But ultimately, we spend time before preparing. Right? We'll have a document that's shared with both of us, maybe let's say 2 weeks before at least, and where we know that we're both just like brain dumping things and ideas that we know we need to discuss during this day together. And it does a number of things, right? It allows you to dump it, so you're not having to keep remembering it, and then you forget it, right? That's what would happen to me. That's why I have to take good notes and write things down, right? But it helps me to move on to thinking about the next things, right? Because I know I've got it there. But it also allows him to see those things. It allows him to be thinking about those things ahead of time also. And me to think about the things that he has written down, right? And so the night before, we go back to that list. Let's say we fly in somewhere, we meet for dinner that night, we pull that list up, and then we prioritize things. And we put them in order so we know which are the most important things for us to discuss. And guess what? The next morning, we can start writing on that list, right? We know the priority of things. We've already set that out. We've also had another night to just think and pray about those things, and really just sit on them a few hours, right? Before we come back in for discussion. So I have found that has helped us to have such a productive day, just strategy day together, as we look at the future of Life Bridge Capital. Because if you go into that blind, you're going to waste a ton of time just thinking of those things, and you're going to spend more than half of your day together, your time, just trying to think of those things, and it's so unproductive to do that. And think about the money it takes and the costs to go do that and get together. And so we want to maximize that, right? And by not doing that, we're wasting a lot of time, a lot of money, right, to make that happen. However, when done well and prepared for, it is worth so much more than the cost it takes to go make that happen in the time. It is such a worthy time investment of your leadership team. So he says, connect your strategy and execution. And many senior leadership teams perform some version of an annual strategy setting process, but they're less successful in connecting the dots to fully executing it. This is because it's intellectually stimulating to talk about strategy, no doubt about it. We all just love thinking and dreaming, right? And all these things. But then he says, it takes more effort to clarify how to execute it as part of the process. Very few organizations regularly or effectively refer to their strategy work after the session is completed. He says this is a common problem in over 95% of the organizations they have worked with. I could not agree with that more. It is, it's so easy, right? And it's stimulating, it's exciting, right? To go think about growth and scaling and have all these ideas and write these things down. And then all of a sudden you just come right back to putting fires out and you kind of forget about it, right? And the most recent time that Sam and I did this, I felt it was so productive. It was unifying for he and I. We had some great conversation about the future of LifeBridge and some big decisions made. Really, and talk about lessons learned, right, from the previous year. But it's so true. We haven't visited that enough afterwards, right? All those notes and action items that we created. I know off the top of my head that we've done a number of those things. However, he and I should be going back more often and talking about just that. And I plan for us to do that. By the way, I'm going to bring that up to him today. And I hope that you will as well. If you have done this with your leadership team or business partner or spouse, right? Maybe you're the CEO and the only person in the leadership, and you need to talk to your spouse about these things, that you all go do this also. So he says, I believe strategy needs to be based on what the company can do, not solely on what the senior leadership team would like to see happen. Oh my goodness. Talk about a big statement, right? It's so true. He says there often tends to be a disconnect from what their organization currently has the capability to do. So, often a disconnect, he says, from what the organization currently has the capability to do. So we go and we dream, we think about all these big things, and we go and say, let's go make this happen. But we don't really have maybe the capability yet to do that. It's so common with smaller organizations. I'm guilty of that personally. A couple recent decisions, I would say, even over the last year, 6 months, that I personally made, just wanting to scale, right, wanting to grow, but we did not have the capability within LifeBridge yet to do those things. And I think it's some major lessons learned. Thankfully, they weren't harmful to the organization, but that is so true right there. There's a disconnect between what I thought we could do but really our capability yet, right? He says when this happens, there's often too many ideas and initiatives to execute properly on any of them. And so it's just such a good thing to keep in mind. A couple of these things I could have put right out there, let's say 3 years from now for LifeBridge, and we would have been more successful at some of those things versus trying to do them too early or before we had the capability. And he says in many cases, people are being asked to do things they have never done before and don't have the capability to do. It can be easy to say that something didn't work, but had the task been given to someone with the right capabilities, it would have worked. So it's just hard lessons, right? As an entrepreneur, as a business owner, thinking about right person, right seat. You hear that from the EOS traction methodology, right? Right person, right seat is so crucial. And it even goes back to your hiring process and ensuring the culture of your organization. And I love that Lee Benson here is so big on culture and connecting that to your most important number. I love that he is big on that. I also believe that it is so connected. And yesterday's show, we talked about that more in depth. But he says when the senior leadership team is ready to address strategy, it's important to have a clear purpose, framework, and rules of engagement. And what we talked about a little bit. Sam and I could do a much better job at laying those things out, but that's what we were doing, right? And then we did the priority, you listed them in priority level. So he says, as previously stated, the purpose of having a strategy session is to make decisions causing sustained improvement in your organization's most important number over time. Coming to an agreement on a strategy session's purpose, framework, and rules of engagement are all critical decisions. And so again, it is a critical, it's critical decisions. He says for every 100 decisions made, only about 1 to 3 of them will be actually critical. And he says critical decisions with the biggest impact on the most important number generally fall into 5 categories. And I'm going to gloss over these at a high level, but I want to apply a couple of these in a little more detail to our business, right? As a syndication business in commercial real estate, raising money with investors, how we work with investors. I was even talking to a friend yesterday about what their most important number in their syndication business. And not everybody knows. Most people, I would say, do not know what that most important number, even at the top of the organization, much less down to the bottom, right? And so critical decisions with the biggest impact on the most important number generally fall into five categories. One is value, another is elements. And again, I'm going to go into a little bit of these in a little more detail, but context, pricing, and alliances. And so I like this value one. And this is going to be for any business. But he says decision category one is value. You know, I only as I read just a couple sentences here, I want you to think about this in relation to your business and investors, right? And so he says the first category, improving the perceived and actual value of your products and services. It should be a never ending, evergreen process. It's not uncommon for an organization to believe their customers love their products and services much more than they actually do. As a result, many senior leadership teams make decisions to scale before they have something with enough perceived value in the marketplace to scale in a way they think it will or want it to. Customers' experience is everything. Yet many leadership teams tell me they're too busy focusing on scaling and spending time on customer experience. We all know customer experience is of the utmost importance if we want to sell more of what we have to offer. If we know this to be true, why don't more organizations have resources dedicated to studying and improving customer experience? Think about how that applies to our businesses and our investors' experience. We call it our investors' journey or life cycle, right? And we hope it never ends, right? And so, but for it to never end, guess what? They have to have a great experience. And I can relate to this so much as far as, hey, we're so focused on scaling. And we've talked about this a number of times on the show in different ways, but it's the same thing. We're so focused on scaling that we forget to focus on all the investors, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of investors who are already committed to us, who have already given us their hard-earned capital, right, and invested it with us, trusting it with us that we forget, right? We don't focus on them enough. We don't go back and say, "Wait a minute, how can we improve this process?" I mean, we have done that to some degree, but I don't think near enough. I mean, personally, and even the other operators that I know, most have not done this. Right? One operator I know has spent more than $1 million a year just in marketing, right, to raise more money. I think, man, what if we took a portion of that and did exactly what Lee talks about here, right? And studied that process and improved the process for our current customers or investors in our case, right? So they love their products and services that much more, right? Think about how much that would help you to scale if we just wowed them to death, right? I mean, from the beginning to the end, it is so crucially important. And we have talked about that, but I feel like at LifeBridge, we've not spent enough time or resources on studying that process. We have continually tried to improve it, but I just think we have so far to go. And I'm just being transparent with you. And I feel like we have improved it, but man, I want to improve it so much better. And I think it starts with me, right? It starts with me and it goes all the way down to the last person of the organization. And because everybody, right, should have a number that's contributing to the most important number. And so what is that most important number for you? And I think really you're going to get down to, everybody talks about revenue, right? There's a number of different ways to think about, well, what is the most important number? Is it revenue? I almost feel like in our business, it's your return metrics for or your actual returns that you've contributed to your investors. And it's like I can almost relate. I think everybody's seat, right, and number, most important number, up to that. But maybe we'll talk more about that in the future. We'd love to hear from you at info@lifebridgecapital.com. And if there are things that stick out to you that you'd like for me to talk more about or how we've done specific things in LifeBridge, again, I'd love to hear from you. I hope that you will take the time to email me and let me know. Let me know your thoughts about the show, ways we can improve it, people you'd love to be on. All right. So critical decisions about team members' performance can significantly increase or decrease the value of your organization creates. Leaving leaders in place for too long who don't have the capability to deliver on their roles outcome-based responsibilities are often the costliest decisions a senior leadership team can make. We know by now that choosing not to make a decision here is making a decision. Man, and I think this can be so hard when, we have hearts, right? And I love my people, right? I love that our employees, I care about them greatly. And so it can be a very difficult thing to have to change somebody around, right? Or say, hey, I feel like maybe this is not the right role for you. Or maybe these tasks, we thought these would be good for under your position or for you to do, but now we see that, hey, maybe this person over here should be doing these things and you should be focused on this over here, right? That's a hard decision to have sometimes, but man, it is crucially important. Even him talking about, I mean, leaving the leaders in place too long, right? That are they're not delivering on their roles, outcome-based responsibilities, right? He says it's the costliest decision a senior leadership team can make. So he said leaving a team member in place who isn't delivering on their roles, responsibilities for too long is also the least caring thing you can do. It sets up the employee for inevitable failure instead of giving them an opportunity to be successful elsewhere. And it is demoralizing to other team members who are performing well. I learned this lesson the hard way by leaving leaders in positions for too long where they didn't deliver. And it cost my business millions of dollars. Every team member should know what is expected to be successful and how well they are performing in their respective role 100% of the time. That was him speaking there as far as it's cost their business millions of dollars. I think as you grow, I think it's cost all of us millions of dollars because we're all guilty of this. We don't know where we would have been if we had moved somebody around faster or unfortunately maybe terminated somebody's employment faster or got to change some tasks around, right? Because of somebody's skill sets or they're not performing in a certain area or, spent the time with that employee to dive in to say, hey, how are you doing? Right. And we've talked about that. I encourage you to go back and listen to how I do alignment meetings and how we meet every month with every employee that reports to me. And we talk about that, right? Where it's a time for us to discuss these things outside of the day-to-day fire work, right? I'm meaning putting out fires every day, or we talk every week almost with almost every employee or whoever they report to. And we're putting out fires oftentimes during those meetings, or we have a specific thing we're pushing forward on, or they are, and they have some questions, right, for whoever they report to. But we do have a time every month where I'm getting to ask them, "Hey, how are you doing?" Right? And it's a time to learn about some of these things that we're talking about right now. Are they performing, right? And getting to dive in on the performance piece a little bit, but often. Not doing it once a year, right? But doing it much, much more often. So, decision 3 is context, determining where to compete, not to compete is a third. He says type of critical decision, and we talked about this thing on the show, right? It's shiny object syndrome. It's the same thing. He says the problem was early on we said yes to virtually every repair request made. And so they were in the aerospace engineering business, right? And he says as a result, we developed 10,000 plus repairs over the years. Less than 100 of them made up 80% of our revenue at the time he sold the business. So think about that. If he, man, if he had just cut all those repairs out and just focused on that 100, right, that made up 80%, man, he says they would be 3 times larger. They would have been when he sold the business, they would have been 3 times larger than they actually were. And that is so many of us. If we focused on 1 or 2, 5, whatever critical things that we are the best at it, but in his case, that's contributing to that most important number, man, it would just help us to grow and to scale, right, so much faster. So man, for a really long time. There's so many things I want you to know as a listener, but maybe we'll have to do another show. I want to finish some of this discussion, but I want to leave you with one other thing here. So, and then we'll follow up on it in another episode. But he said, we found in the most important number that it's the easiest thing to get your team's head around when it comes to describing what aspirationally winning looks like over time. And so, aspirationally winning, right? What does that look like? He says, refers to describing what is possible if everything worked out perfectly for the organization, given its capabilities. It can also be helpful to find out what aspirational winning looks like for each senior leader on the team. He said, this thought evoking question rarely yields initial agreement, but don't despair. It's all part of the process. Alignment takes effort. I would I can completely relate to that. I think Sam and I often, when we're having these meetings, there's things like when we're first bringing something up, the other one might say, "Oh, I don't think so," or "What about this?" Right, and then the other person may say, "Oh, I don't really think that's accurate," or maybe this, right? But guess what? By the time we flesh that out a little bit, maybe a few hours later, we come back to it, and then we're in agreement about some specific things about it, right? Or maybe the next day we've slept on it, had time to think about it, pray about it, and then we're in alignment, right? But it's bringing that up. It's having that process so you can win, right? And so you do know what your most important number is. And so that your entire team knows what their most important number is and how it contributes to the top and on and so forth. But again, I encourage you to go listen to Lee's book or read it, buy it, because I think he breaks it down really simple. I think some of these systems can seem very complicated, right? And figuring out these things for your team and employees, and it is much more detailed than maybe I've laid out in 2 episodes here. But not all of it is, right? And the simpler we can keep it, the more likely we are to do it, the more likely your team is to do it as well, especially when you simplify, down to their most important number. All of a sudden, they can think about the tasks they're doing and quickly determine if it's contributing to their most important number or not, and then ultimately to the organization's most important number. All right. Well, that's it for this show. I hope that you are learning. I hope your business is growing. I hope you're growing personally as well because of the Real Estate Syndication Show and the work that we're putting in here. Again, I would love to hear from you at info@lifebridgecapital.com. Let us know what you would like to hear on the show, the guests that you would like they're interviewed. Maybe you're struggling in a certain part of the business and you'd like for me to talk about how LifeBridge has done that or ask other guests about how they have done specific things. I'd love to hear from you. I hope that you will share the show with someone today. Will you like and subscribe as well? Please hit that button, whether it's on YouTube or in your podcast player. I hope that you're subscribed. Again, I would love to hear from you. Have a blessed day. Thank you for being with us again today. I hope that you have learned a lot from the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you're telling your friends about the Real Estate Syndication Show and how they can also build wealth in real estate. You can also go to lifebridgecapital.com and start investing today.